yesterday, let's just say that where we were was not a good point, because this is the type of statements we were having the Secretary of State of the United States announce because he thought it was necessary. From Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and I quote, "I can assure you this, we will not be providing military aid to the Russians." Congrats. Oh my gosh. How nice of them. Can we all thank them? Is this the stuff that we needed to say thank you for? Thank you for not giving the Russians free bombs to bomb Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you for not giving them tanks to invade Ukraine. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for not, for not just like, putting Marines to go storm Pokrovsk, with the Wagner group. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so this is the type of stuff we were seeing as we were gearing up for the big meeting in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia today. This was the foreground massaging I was getting from the State Department. So I was not excited, but I got a dash of hope when I saw this picture come out, because you can see there's Yarmak right there on the right. You can see there's also Zelensky, other members of the staff. Then you got Marco Rubio on the left there. You got Mike Waltz on the left. And the thing is, what made me confident about this picture is Ukraine will now always have a final resort. That at any point, the Ukrainians can simply eat the Americans because they are much larger. So as an active final resort, we are prepared. But besides that, leading up to today's negotiations, there was one more thing that I need to say that sets the tone before we talk about the specifics of what those Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor to the President Mike Waltz, Yarmak, who is Zelensky's aide, but almost universally despised in Ukraine. He's like a 13% approval rating, and he leans into it. I follow his social media sometimes, and he'll post these pictures where he's like looming in his chair, and he's like dark, and he's like, oh God, he's the evil advice. It's almost like he's leaning into being Wormtongue, which I'm like, I don't know if you can lean into being Wormtongue, but he does it. And I mean, you do you, boo, I guess, whatever. But in setting up for today's negotiations, the Ukrainians did a massive drone attack across Russia. And a lot of it was concentrated in the Moscow area. Now, the Moscow area has a lot of air defense systems in it, and the Russians have done their best to try to keep Moscow from seeing the worst of the war, both when it comes to, air defense systems and, it not getting hit with, Ukrainian drone attacks, which have gone deeper and deeper into the country, sometimes as far as 1,300 kilometers in recent strikes. I mean, even hitting ports near Dagestan and stuff, crazy out there. But another way that's trying to preserve it is through conscription. And what I'm saying is that you'll see in certain areas like Tuva, conscription numbers are much higher than in the Moscow area. And so therefore the casualty numbers are sometimes, not sometimes, are a lot higher in areas in Russia's far east, in areas away from the political center, and where a lot of Putin's power base comes from, in areas like Moscow, in the Moscow area. But as the war continues to go on and manpower demands will expand, if, we don't see anything change in the near future, that is, the threat of them being brought into the war will continue to increase more and more, as Putin's scared of what mobilizing them for the fight could mean. But also, there's this fear that the Ukrainians will continue to expand the war into the Moscow area by force, especially since Ukrainian drone production, the Ukrainians are reporting that this year that they plan to produce 30,000 drones of the type that we're going to see in this video, as well as 3,000 drone missile hybrids, which would mean that would be more drones that Ukraine has made and fired at Russia for the entirety of the war this year alone. So that would be quite substantial. And the Russians are reporting much higher drone attack numbers, a lot more numbers than over 100 drones in a day, a lot more numbers in the triple digits than just in the double digits. Let's watch. This is the Moscow area. So there's a lot of videos like this. But the point is that Ukraine is doing this, and their original plan was to offer a ceasefire today to the Russians, but it touches the area of drones and missiles. So what they would be trying to do is, hey, you stop firing missiles and drones at our cities, and we'll stop firing drones at your cities. And we'll also stop firing in the Black Sea. We also need to restrict the Black Sea from being a battleground as well. So what the Ukrainians are saying, let's do a partial ceasefire where the Black Sea is off limits and long-range strikes are off limits. And they're saying, let's try that for some 30-day period or some like ceasefire period. Now, I think that the reason they hit so hard was to make a point that, number one, they could do that, and to make credible to the Russians that, hey, we will continue to expand these types of attacks, but also to make credible to the Americans that they can. That, hey, we will continue to expand our attacks. Don't think we have any cards, because when Trump says you don't have any cards, I think the Ukrainians are somewhat of the opinion like, okay, let's show you what cards we have. Let's show you what force we have. Let's show that we can bring Moscow still in our reach. No matter what's happening in Kursk right now, or the counterattacks in Toretsk, we continue to expand our drone production, and the front line is not actively collapsing, meaning we will continue to bring the war deeper and deeper into Russia. It is them trying to show what cards they have. And while there's not going to be this immediate Russian collapse because they hit some oil refinery here, it is a slow building pressure where the Ukrainians are continuing to hit Russian oil refineries. Listen to this. The General Staff confirmed a strike on the Moscow oil refinery, which processes 11 million tons of oil annually and supplies 40 to 50% of Moscow's diesel and gasoline needs. And it's not just this one. There's been a lot of these oil refineries that have been hit and targeted. And so it's Ukraine's way of saying, you know, I bloodied your nose. Look what we can do. We'll continue to bloody your nose, so to speak. Now, moving on, the big news today is what was agreed to, because the long-range strike ceasefire is not ultimately what was offered. But I understand where the Ukrainians came from, and I think that them engaging on that was intelligent, because let's say that they did achieve that long-range ceasefire, while it would, of course, mean that Ukrainian pressure on their drone campaign would stop, they would still be allowed to produce what they're saying is record-setting drone production that they could fire later, and it would remove pressure from Ukrainian industry that is trying to produce weapons and other things to defend themselves and, you know, try to entrench themselves. And so that would mean that those factories could not be hit by long-range missiles or drones. That's unless, of course, the Russians violate the ceasefire, which, you know, when Marco Rubio and all these other staff members, but mainly J.D. Vance and Donald Trump were lambasting Zelensky in that meeting, one of the things Zelensky said is they violated the ceasefire 25 times. And, you know, that's a possibility always with any type of the parts of these negotiations or ceasefires. The violations of them is something we need to be on the lookout for, and we can't, like, be soft-handed about. We can't. It's a ceasefire or it isn't. But I understood where the Ukrainians were coming from when it comes to this long-range strikes and trying to protect their industry, and also trying to stop the Russians from firing missiles from the Black Sea. But, I mean, I think the Ukrainian Black Sea naval war has been quite effective in its own right. Anyway, that's not what was agreed to. What happened instead was an agreement where the United States was able to get Ukraine to agree to a 30-day ceasefire, general ceasefire, meaning immediate ceasefire of artillery, missiles, drones, everything. No guns can be fired. No lives can be lost. Unless, I guess, you accidentally kick a mine or something. But yeah, besides, you know, the odd accident, no lives can be lost. So it's a complete ceasefire for 30 days immediately. This has been agreed to by Ukraine. This has not been agreed to by the Russians. Now, we don't know if the Russians are going to agree to it or not. And I think there's a few ways of thinking about this, of why they might not agree to it, which, I mean, we've been open about the reasons the Russians would have for trying to continue to push now, or try to even push for better terms at this point, especially with the Western coalition behind Ukraine looking so divided. And there's also reasons as to why they might accept it, even if it's just to accept it and then, you know, resume fighting later, as we're seeing with, for example, the Israel-Palestinian war, Israel-Gaza war, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, the Ukrainians agreed to it. They're gonna throw this at the Russians, and we're gonna see what the Russians say in response. Now, let me read to you a little bit from this, and then we're gonna talk about why they would or would not agree to it. Ukraine agreed Tuesday to an immediate 30-day ceasefire negotiated by the U.S. if Russia accepts the plan, officials said. As part of the plan, the U.S. immediately lifted its pause on sharing intelligence with Ukraine and will resume security assistance to that country, which was invaded by Russia more than 3 years ago. So, that is another big piece of news, is that aid to Ukraine is now being restored, both intelligence and military. This is Security Advisor Waltz after the meeting.
That, and I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward, and that's effective immediately.
Okay, now to be clear, this doesn't mean that they're sending more aid. This doesn't mean that they've passed more aid. No, this means that a few $1 billion that is still left in the Presidential Drawdown Authority that Biden had already put back in the tube and had been frozen in the tube is now resuming its continuation to be sent to Ukraine. So it's not new aid, there's no new aid package. It's just the same aid that was passed during the Biden administration that is now continuing to be sent to Ukraine, as well as now the resumption of intelligence sharing. Now, I will ask, what exactly did this achieve? What exactly did this achieve? But the Russians seemingly trying to take advantage of it to push the Ukrainians out of Kursk and lessen their leverage. I still don't see what this has achieved. I don't think this has significantly moved us forward in negotiations in any way, and I do think this has significantly lessened our leverage. I think that the amount this has moved us forward is not worth the amount we lessened our leverage through the freezing of security assistance. Either way, the security assistance is back on, at least for now, until, you know, Trump gets his, you know, caught in his feelings again. Both U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources, according to a joint statement by the two nations' governments. Zelensky in a statement said the planned ceasefire would halt all hostilities, not just for missiles, drones, and bombs, but in the Black Sea, but along the entire front line. Ukraine welcomes this proposal. We see it as a positive step, and we are ready to take it, Zelensky said. The United States must now persuade Russia to do the same. If Russia agrees, silence will take effect immediately. Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable. Well, I mean, if your security assurances is that mineral deal, then it's not enduring, but let's see. And accounts for their interests, their security, and their ability to prosper as a nation. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope they'll say yes, and they'll say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court. And that's the big quote from Marco Rubio. The ball is now in their court. So, what will the Russians do? And do I think Ukraine should have agreed to this? First thing is, do I think Ukraine should have agreed to this? I mean, I honestly, if it means that they get a continuation of aid and intelligence sharing, which, you know, at least buys Europe more time to find alternatives, at the very least, and all that comes from it so far is the offer of a 30-day ceasefire that could blow up in 30 days, the Russians could violate in 10, or the Russians could just straight up reject. I don't really see a problem with it. And I think keeping the United States engaged, even if it ends up eventually like making demands that are completely unfulfillable and then will need an eventual disengagement, still an extra 2 to 3 months of shells being shipped and assistance being handed over, even temporarily, can extend the Ukrainian battle and the Ukrainian reserves and give it more breath, give it more air. And so, considering that nothing really has technically been given up by the Ukrainians outside of maybe whatever this mineral deal is going to be, which it was already renegotiated from what was basically in a colonial extraction program where the United States would be seeping off of 50% of all of Ukraine's natural wealth when it's trying to rebuild its dilapidated and bombed out communities. And it was been renegotiated to a more investment plan that the United States could also profit from. I don't know if they're going to tweak it anymore, or if they're going to renegotiate it any more slightly, or they're just going to go with that plan. But that's also advancing forward. Now, I do not believe Marco Rubio when he says stuff like, oh, this is one of the best security guarantees you can get. Nonsense, okay? Okay, no one is going to convince me that America having a trade arrangement and an extraction program with Ukrainians is a more deterring effect than U.S. Marines in a city saying, if you fire at us, we're going to unleash hell on you. Like that, that's just not, it's not the same. It's not. It's not. Or NATO membership or any other type of security assurance that comes with physical force. But it does keep the United States engaged. And whether it can, if the Russians do end up flopping, and I don't know how they would, I think that there could be a possibility. And I mean, these are all, I think the Russians are smart enough to try to avoid this, but also I think that they're not willing to concede enough that it's always going to be a possibility. That they are not willing to concede enough to make Trump be able to say, God damn it, I can't justify normalization. God damn it, I can't justify this to the public. I look like too much of a coward. I look too weak. Because, you know, there has been some pretty negative reaction to the ways that Zelensky has been treated by much of the population. Maybe not this strong base, but you need those midterm numbers. This is not 2026 Trump where he doesn't need to worry about any election in the near future. He still has one more election he needs to worry about, and that's in 2 years. And the pullout from Afghanistan was a disaster for Biden. It was the first, while it was what Americans had said that they wanted, just like Americans say they want peace in Ukraine, once they saw what that withdrawal was, it hurt his numbers. And once they would see what a Russian Trump peace could actually maybe look like in a, you know, a kind of miscarriaged peace deal, I think that they might not be so happy with it. So the ball is in their court to that extent. But I still think that on Trump's mind, he wants normalization. And he's willing to probably give the Russians a lot more rope in negotiations than I think any other administration that could have taken the White House would have, honestly. But that still might not be enough for Russian hubris. Man. This is crazy, man. Any questions?